Hello and welcome to the Christian Study Abroad podcast. My name is Greg Belgum, and I'm the Vice President of Living and Learning International and serve as the conference chair for the Christian Study Abroad Conference. Today, I am joined by Dr. Amanda Avila Kaminski. Dr. Kaminski is a theologian and social innovator dedicated to the intersection of spirituality and peace building. As the Hugo and Georgia Gibson Endowed Professor at Texas Lutheran University, she directs the Social Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship Program and chairs the board for the global network INFEMIT. Her research bridges historical movements with contemporary ethics, most notably in her role as co-editor of the Past Light for the Present Life series from Fordham University Press. Her recent co-edited volume, Resurrection and Contemporary Spirituality, engages senior spirituality scholars in a vital dialogue on how to cultivate an Easter faith in a world of violence and deconversion. Recognized by the Association for Theological Schools as one of 30 women shaping the future of the field, Dr. Kaminski is a leading voice in the evolution of North American theological education. Dr. Kaminski will also be joining us at the Christian Study Abroad Conference in a few weeks as one of our plenary speakers. In our conversation today, we're going to hear about Dr. Kaminski's scholarship, her hopeful vision for the Academy, and a sneak peek into what she'll be sharing at the conference. I'm so excited for this conversation. Dr. Kaminski, welcome to the podcast.
Greg, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Good. Well, hey, before we jumped on and hit record, we were talking about how we could go a lot of directions with our conversation. But I wonder if just to get us started, your work and your research has been has had a big emphasis on interdisciplinary learning. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if we even just start there. Why do you think interdisciplinary learning is critical for this time?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, like you said, there are so many ways that we could even take this question, but I think to give you a little introduction to me and to kind of situate this within the larger body of my work, I'd love to tell you a little bit about a recent project that I did. My university was awarded a 4-year National Science Foundation grant when I first came to TLU. And one of the prompts that the grant included was finding humanities professors that would be willing to experiment with quantitative metrics. Like, how can we measure things in theology? What does it even look like? So the very basis of this grant award was looking at the sort of possibilities of interdisciplinarity. And so some of the math faculty came to me and said, what would, in a perfect world, what would it look like for us to fund a project for you related to this? And I said, I'm so glad you asked. I'm very curious, working with undergrads, how we can look at their imagery of God. In their imagination, what are they saying God looks like? How does God speak? What does God act like? What's God's character? And then how are they differentiating that from what they've inherited from their family of origin or their faith community? Where are they seeing this in their lived experience? And then how does that, or does that not, correlate with what they're actually doing in their lived experience? So the practices that they do they see their eating patterns and their bodily expressions, if they're athletes, as a form of spirituality, or do they see those things as disconnected? What are their attitudes about certain things? What are their fears? Like, if I gave them a list and they could write how to rank their fears, does that correlate with their imaginary of God, or does it not? What do they say about their desires, and is that reflected in their habituation? Like, are they creating habits of daily rhythms that are actually facilitating the things that they say are desires for their life? So we used just real basic instruments. We used SurveyMonkey, and we took a longitudinal study over 4 years and gathered over 275 subjects data and looked at some trends. And what was interesting was I was doing this within a larger project that was investigating what we're calling the polycrisis of Gen Z. All of the literature, it shows us that Gen Z, they're calling Gen Z the quote unquote least religious generation in US history. And I was concerned about this because what I've actually discovered, and what some of the research from Pew and even Barna seems to kind of offer as a counterpoint is that while it is true that Gen Z is faced with unprecedented levels of anxiety, with mental health crises, with unprecedented deconversion stats, and self-proclaimed institutional distrust, and that's on every level, from parents to police to university presidents or university professors to the government, they're also leading the conversation on spiritual questions. They are having more frequent conversations about meaning making than their parents and grandparents. So what does this mean for me? Well, I think we're in a system, we're in a moment where single lens solutions are not adequate for addressing the sort of integrative life of Gen Z, right? They're waking up with their phones in their bed and they're immediately touching a screen where they're being inundated by global crises. And they're also totally choking on a knowledge that, or an experiential reality that they don't know who to trust. They know that the top two things that my 275 subjects mentioned were the most urgent crises facing them were misinformation and racism. They know that some of what they're consuming on their quote unquote feeds is not feeding them truth. And they don't know who to trust about this. And so one of the things that I mention in my research in this recent book on resurrection and contemporary spirituality is that they're framing their situation as trauma. They're identifying their lived experience as trauma. And so we have this new theme in cinema called the trauma trope. We have, Vox Media said there's something like 6 million hits on like hashtag trauma dumping online. Trauma is a way that Gen Z is framing their lived experience. And so in theology, if all we do is double down on looking at specifically what it means to believe in God, and we're not able to integrate into what we call sort of like the T framework, where we go deep in one thing, but then we go broad across a lot of other things, then we're siloing their belief structures, and we're not creating an infrastructure or a system where their imagination about God and what it means to live a life of Christian faith can actually touch economic problems, global considerations, right? Their habits of, optimizing human performance. Like, what does this mean for their health? What does it mean for their nutrition? And so I think that interdisciplinary learning is about, for me as a theologian, building a moral imagination that allows their faith to touch every other aspect of their lived experience. So I think it's an ability to look at broken systems, whether those are systems of journalism, whether those are systems of learning, whether those are systems of economics, reimagining broken systems, not as a crisis that's going to actually disable us from finding solutions, but as an opportunity that we could reframe trauma as potential for actually unsettling things that are not working to allow a catalyst for something new. And when we do that, we're moving into my work of entrepreneurship, which is saying that we can see problems not only as like as fodder for further mental crises, mental health, but as possibilities for God to actually birth something new in the soil of brokenness, right? That's the whole message of the gospel, is that in the midst of deconstruction, God can build something in the husk of the old. And I think for experiential learning, this is the opportunity that study abroad gives us, because when we're dislocated from what's normal, we can sometimes experience overwhelm through, navigating a new travel system and navigating new language and navigating new cultures. And now we're living with people who are bringing in stories that are super unfamiliar. And that can be a fragmenting experience. But we know that the awe and the beauty and the unsettling of Study Away actually gives us an invitation to creating something new that's a life-transforming experience. There's a public intellectual who studies regret. His name's Dan Pink. And he says that in all of the work that he's ever done on looking at people's experiences about self-reporting regret, their number one thing that they regret in their adulthood is not studying abroad.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
And this is the invitation, is later in later adulthood, they look back and they're like, actually, the number one thing that I regret is not acting on something and being like, oh man, it's inaction that they're like, I missed an opportunity. And this is what study abroad offers is like, yeah, it's scary. Yeah, they're calling us, Gen Z's like, they're calling us the anxious generation. I don't know if I can leave my community of origin. I don't know if I want to move away from my parents. I'm just now making friends in my 4-year institution. And what would it look like to invite them into not further anxiety, but awe, an opportunity to reframe this narrative about who they are and to give them intentional Christian communities that will guide them through experiences of unsettling so that they can actually increase their ability to live in uncertainty so that they see that as an opportunity for God to do something new in them. And we're doing that by rooting them in deep, deep disciplines of Christian imagination that have existed for generations. And then inviting them into curated conversations with the local community so that they can see God in unexpected places.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you brought us through a lot of territory there, even, from interdisciplinary learning to, I just want to camp there for just a second and say, like, as I'm listening to you talk about that, I'm nodding my head saying, yeah, like bring in scholars from all the disciplines and make this integrated. And I think, in a very simplistic view, those that are in higher ed are kind of working their way towards specialization is kind of the track, you just go deeper into your specialization. But what I'm hearing you talk about is the ability to kind of, okay, while they're in your specialization, now let's begin to work together. And that takes trust, that takes, vision to look beyond your tribe or your guild within the academy, and to invite and kind of work across campus even. So that's kind of one piece that I heard you kind of touch down on. And then at the undergraduate level experience with study abroad programming as we're designing these things, I mean, I think you're preaching to the choir here to this audience when they say, yes, like this is the biggest regret. And students, we do want to mobilize them and we do want to get them to go, but there's all these barriers of fear and anxiety and of, whatever the other pieces you pointed to. And so just to kind of connect it to the interdisciplinary piece there, it's when you go abroad, it is a deeply immersive moment to integrate. So if interdisciplinary learning is around integration of different disciplines, so is the study abroad experience. It's integration across, your whole person, all your senses are alive, everything. And you gotta draw on every part of your being to be able to like move through that experience. Am I drawing a false equivalency there, or do you see that to be the case that there's some parallel?
100%. Yeah. And I think you articulated this so-called T-shaped professional model that Harvard Business Review loves in such a practical way that like the guild tells you, the academy tells you, build deep expertise in one thing, right? Like you are a theologian, you are a business person, you are a communications person, you do marketing, you do God, and you, right? Like, it's like, they want to give us this very clear silo that we're supposed to live in, right? That's your field. And what Harvard Business Review has really been arguing or demonstrating in their literature over the last like 5 to 10 years has been that vertical bar is real and is necessary for our professional development. But at the same time, true innovation, the best ideas, and actually there's really good research that shows that in economic precarity, like in moments of economic crisis, that actually impact is better, is more likely in organizations where they have not just a deep silo, a deep expertise, but where they are conventionally grounded in one thing and they have atypical combinations across the horizontal bar. So they're able to do theology in conversation with public health, in conversation with business, and in conversation with marketing and storytelling, right? That what you're calling interdisciplinarity, that ability to look up and see across the board the significance of what you do well in relationship and in what you called synthesis with others, is actually gives you an advantage for being able to pivot in a moment where there's crisis. And so this T model, going deep in one thing, but being able to collaborate and even synthesize across disciplines, is actually the very bridge between deep vision and ability to execute that makes an organization excellent. And I think this is the advantage that study abroad gives to a student, is they have the ability to be able to more deeply understand their own discipline, but now they're seeing they're not only just traveling with people from other disciplines and being able to articulate the insights of their own learning to people who study other things, but they're not just seeing learning in the narrowness of a classroom. They're seeing it in the possibilities of going to a museum, of observing businesses in practice in the place where they're studying. They're seeing it in navigating the train system and analyzing the architecture of a city that's different than their own. And for me, as a theologian who also studies and teaches entrepreneurship, this feels obvious because I'm looking at the model of Jesus and I'm like, yeah, this is the way that Jesus taught. Jesus didn't teach just in a synagogue or just in a lecture hall. Jesus was walking around with disciples and picking up common things and saying things like, you have heard it said, this is the conventional knowledge of your religious framework. But I say to you, and their minds were like, and this opportunity of like iconoclasm, of your ideas being busted open, is not only a holy idea, that God is bigger than the boxes we've put God in, but that actually that is the edge of innovation. Because what Gen Z is experiencing crisis over is that the things that they're inheriting are not working. Our public health system is not working. They went to high school, and now even some of them middle school, our college students, went to high school and middle school in the middle of a global pandemic. They're seeing the possibilities of digital affordances, but they're also seeing unintentional consequences. That while they are the most digitally connected generation in existence, they're also rating at the highest levels of isolation. And we know the public health precarities of isolation. It leads to all kinds of other problems with their health. And so they're experiencing these dissonances. And what I think is so promising for intentionally designed Christian experiences of immersion and global education is that we're not shying away from dissonance. We're saying dissonance, disruption is a holy opportunity. It's a possibility. And by traveling together with people that are studying things that are different than you, by being invited into conversations where there's synthesis across disciplines, by bridging your local experience with the global realities of study abroad, you're actually experiencing iconoclasm. Your mind is being blown apart such that there's more space for new imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely. And I mean, the imagery that is coming to my mind is like you put your head down and you dig deep and you do some work in your discipline, in your area, and then you pick your head up and you see how it connects across. And then you go deep and you go up. And rather than this linear, just like continually going deep, you're picking your head up and you're going across. Yes. The other kind of imagery that I had too is like, if you're only staying deep within your discipline, you're kind of competing against the other people who are also trying to be the most special expert in that discipline. But then when you pop your head up and you say, I'm going to go work across, interdisciplinary, and with those, I then get to bring my knowledge and my expertise, not to puff myself up and be the smartest person in the room, but to be able to contribute in a meaningful way to the dialogue of the group. And so I think one of the things I'm particularly excited about as we look ahead at this conference that's coming up, I'm particularly excited about the diversity of roles represented in the room. That it's not like one person or one organization or one institution is like the person doing the whole thing of study abroad. It's actually it is this exchange of organizations running programs globally, U.S. colleges and universities with deep history and roots in the U.S. that have the ability to kind of mobilize and pre-departure training and re-entry and all of those pieces and integration of the abroad experience back in. And then of all the other folks along, there's going to be a few federal agencies there that representing. So there's this broader system that's happening here. And it's really not about any one entity or institution or even individual, but to say like together, we can provide some really remarkable opportunities for our students. And so I felt some of the most freedom early in my career. I'm still early in my career, but earlier in my career, I felt like I needed to like be able to match someone at their level of their discipline and kind of be like, I can be in the room with them. And then the freedom I felt was when I realized like, oh, I can just say, hey, my expertise is in study abroad administration. And actually, I feel really good about that area. And I feel like I can speak to that with a degree of knowledge and experience. Not, again, this isn't about puffing myself up. It's really just to say that's where I've spent the bulk of my professional experiences in this area. And I could speak to that. But tell me, what does it mean to be a social worker? What does it mean for your students to have social work learning happen in our study abroad programs? Please speak into this process. So yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of where my head goes of just like, let's be unified, let's work together. And I think that's the desire and the intent here really of the Academy at its best is that it is this kind of cross-pollination work that's happening. Working in this with undergrads gives those that have been at this for a while an opportunity to be reminded to say, oh yeah, okay, let's help the 20-year-olds do this, but let's also help ourselves do this too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I love this way that you're framing this as cooperation and collaboration over competition. This idea that some of the like Olympics of what you're trying to do in the academy is prove excellence. And that sometimes we can get trapped in the values that forms in us. And it's funny, Cindy Lee wrote this book called Unforming, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge to Western spiritual formation, asking like, what's the vision that we have for what spiritual formation looks like? And crudely, it's like using the linear model that you talked about. It's like, okay, it's an XY axis, and the idea is that you're going up, 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 closer and closer and closer to God, right? And then as you get older, you're going further forward and further upward. And that's just like such a disorienting map for those of us who have been on the journey, on the road with Christ a while. It's like, it is much more like this spiral. It's much more like this. And she argues that by having a linear, disconnected, flat imagination, that we're actually setting ourselves up for a map that's not super helpful. And I think that you've nailed that. Like, right, even when we're thinking about the process of like how we architect or scaffold learning, it's like, you're going to go to this class at this time, and then you're going to go to this class at this time. And actually, there's this fascinating study from the late 1980s called where this educational theorist Sweller proposed this framework called cognitive load theory, where essentially what she says is when you have fragmented learning in this like linear way, first you learn your A and P, and then you go to your class on literature, and then you go to your whatever, and then you go to practice, and then you're in leadership in this club. That this experience of lack of integration, this fragmented learning, and this linear model actually increases cognitive load and creates anxiety for the student, because they can't see how the pieces of their leadership development and their curriculum fit together. So the interdisciplinary integrated solution that we're offering to students that are already experimenting with deconstruction, who are experiencing fragmentation, right, through war and ecclesial dislocation or deconversion, and then increased anxiety, is actually being overloaded by the design of what we've done in their experiences in undergrad. And so as a spiritual formation expert, that's like my deep, vertical line in my T frame, is like, I'm a theologian with an expertise in spirituality. And I'm saying, if we resituated Christian higher ed as a framework of meaning making, that everything that we're doing is about creating meaning, and that we can think of the goal. So to your point, like, what's the horizon that we're working towards? The horizon is peace. This image of God's kingdom as a peace economy, that everything in the kingdom is part of building and architecting this new world together. And so we can start to help students metabolize the chaos of the world and the dissonances of what does it mean to be a leader in my team, and how do I translate that into running this student organization, and what am I learning in my literature class, and what am I learning in my A&P class, and how do I bring all of those things together in this framework of meaning making that will allow me to develop not just deep skills in one thing, but a moral imaginary, an imagination where all of these different things are part of the neural framework that's actually allowing their synapses to fire so that they are peace bringers. They are peacemakers in whatever it is that they're doing on the field, in the classroom, on the subway, in their dorm. And this is an alternative imaginary of Christian higher ed.
Can I read you a quote from yourself and get some impressions here?
Yes, please.
You published this recently. You said you wrote this on LinkedIn. You said, in an age of digital noise and institutional distrust, Christian study abroad creates moments of holy dislocation, intentional, prayerful opportunities to be unsettled by the unfamiliar. This isn't just travel; it's a formation lab where awe and uncertainty lead to contemplation. Community covenants replace simple itineraries, and immersive pedagogy becomes a laboratory for spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. There's a lot in there, but this idea of moments of holy dislocation. Could you maybe have you experienced some holy dislocation in your own experience traveling, and what does that look like in your own life, and then how does that then inform how you design programs?
Great question. So I went to a Christian undergrad and loved my experience of the integration of faith and learning, changed my major. I did all the things. I had all the experiences. And upon graduation, I made a vocational decision to go into full-time ministry. My hope was to do international humanitarian aid work. And through that experience with an international ecumenical nonprofit, I was invited to move to Brazil, and it was the study abroad experience par excellence, right? Because I moved into a situation where, even though it's my family's language, right? I grew up in a multi-generational Portuguese-speaking immigrant family. Even though that's true, like I didn't speak fluently. Like I was part of that reality of the sort of immigrant life in the U.S., where my great-grandparents spoke fluently, and then my grandparents spoke, and they spoke with my great-grandparents, and I could understand them in Portuguese, but I couldn't respond in our family's language, right? And so I'm moving into a context where I don't speak the language. I moved into a coastal community where I was partnering with Sofistas de Cristo, this group of Christian surfers, and we were really trying to experiment with catalyzing new locally owned businesses that would be, Christian businesses owned by Christian practitioners who would be protecting their local ecosystem and helping to develop opportunities for income generation in their local community, where the profit would be going to developing the community. And I was coming in as a so-called expert. I mean, what did I know? I was in my 20s, but I went down there and I didn't know how to surf well. I didn't know how to speak the language well. One of my roommates joked that I sounded like an elementary school student, right? Like I had the experience of humility. And here I am with my freshly minted bachelor's from Wheaton College. And I'm like, I'm going in there to serve the Lord abroad. And it was the most fragmenting, dislocating, holy experience ever. And ultimately, this is part of the reason I ended up studying entrepreneurship. Like, what a weird combination to study theology and entrepreneurship. But one of the things that we talk about a lot in entrepreneurial training is that failure is actually not a bad thing. Right? Like there are so many famous, examples. Like Jay-Z, one of the greatest artists of a generation, started off by selling CDs out of the back of his trunk and then ended up incarcerated. And now he's like a billionaire with his own brand of, developing young rap artists, right? Colonel Sanders didn't even develop his business until, middle age. The Dyson company, which is like famous for developing new technology, I think it was something like he had thousands and thousands of prototypes before the funnel technology even worked. And he was living off of his art teacher wife's salary. Like they were living simply. She was a public school teacher, right? And now he's Dyson, right? Like he's like changed the whole way that we do tools. Prototyping is the way that we do things. And in the kingdom, it's not that different, right? Everything that we're doing is, in theology, we call it, a sort of preliminary exploration of prefiguration. We know that the kingdom is coming, but everything is just a preliminary. We're trying it because we're living in the already but not yet kingdom. We know resurrection's coming, but the reality is how do we experience the resurrection of Jesus Christ when war continues to be a reality, where our loved ones die, where we're experiencing planetary decline? This is a fragmentation in theology, right? And we experience that sped up when we do study abroad, when we live overseas, when we get our first job out of college. It's like, none of this stuff is working. I thought I was supposed to do greater thing. Jesus promised greater things than these you will do when I send you my Holy Spirit, right? And I'm living in the Holy Spirit, trying to figure out how to listen to the Spirit, living in a culture where I don't know the codes and where I don't know the language well. And I'm trying to like build businesses when I don't even have a business degree. I have a ministry degree, right? Like, I look back on it now and it feels like almost funny. But what God did in those experiences set a trajectory for me for the rest of my life and changed the lives of the communities I lived in. Like after leaving and coming back to get my dual masters, I've stayed in contact with my communities in Brazil, and so many successful businesses have come out of that. And it wasn't because of me. It was because God was doing something and I was able to come alongside of it and see and learn and fail alongside of them. And we learned together. And that approach to learning with cultural humility, with a sense of trying to look at problems without fear and not look at them as traumatizing, but look at them and process them together and collaboratively design preliminary solutions where we try it on and then reflect again and make adjustments. This is a Christian imagination integrated with entrepreneurial skills. That is why I ended up at the intersection of these two disciplines. And I think, living abroad, it speeds up and amplifies those moments of holy dislocation. We experience them all the time. Anybody listening to this podcast is going to be like, that's what happened when my parent got sick and I had to figure out how to care for my parent. That's what happened when my new job brought us to a new city. That's what happened when my child had to enroll in a new school. Like these moments of unsettling, they're iconoclastic. They break things apart and they create opportunity for new things to grow. And I think I'm framing that as a spirituality scholar as holy dislocation. And I think that's much of what following an incarnational God does for us. God's constantly moving between these different boundaries, doing new things, and we're invited to follow. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, that story of just the unsettling nature that you experienced going there, and I'm sure such a cocktail of emotions all the way through the whole roller coaster of it all. And yet, you stayed kind of committed to like leaning in. And I think that's part of what can happen in these types of environments is people opt out. So even in those like that quick riff of examples you just threw out there about a parent getting sick or about relocating, I think, do we have the ability, the tenacity, and even the vision to lean in and to stick with it?
Yeah.
And because just having hard things happen does not mean that there is learning that will happen.
Exactly right.
And so how we step into those experiences is really like a big deal. And so we're also not trying to opt into just like really traumatizing experiences just for the learning either. And so, I think study abroad at its best can be an environment in which there is this holy dislocation paired really well with some guides that have been there before that can say, hey, let's walk this out together. There will be some oddities, some disorientation, some fragmentation, all those pieces, but you're not alone. It's okay. We're here with you, and let's talk this out together. So, we could keep going for a long time. I'm so excited for you to join us at the conference here in a couple of weeks and to hear some more of these thoughts as you share even about this economy of peace and what does it look like to have to live in a world where we know with hope where we're heading, and yet the days are not always easy. The
No,
days are can be kind of bleak at times. And so
yep.
how do we stick with it, stay in it, maintain hope and a vision for what's coming, while also being real about
Yes.
the pain and the challenge and the suffering are all around us, and the ability to be the hands and feet of
Mm.
God, with our neighbors in our
Mhm.
community.
Mhm.
So yes, thank you
Yeah.
so much even for time today.
My gosh, it was my pleasure. I can't wait for more conversations at CSAC. See you in April.